Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. We're here every Sunday night from 8 till 10 p.m. looking at life through a biblical lens, trying to solve all the world's problems in the 2 hours that we have. We are told in our classes in school and online and conversations and anybody that wants to come along, it pops up every once in a while that it is actually white Christianity that's responsible for slavery. On September 9th of this year, just a week or so ago, a professor from Fairleigh Dickinson University presented for Rutgers University and explained how Christian privilege and white Christian privilege are responsible for slavery, genocide, and colonialism. The Law School Center for Security, Race, and Rights hosted Professor Khyati Joshi for the presentation. Joshi published a book in July with the same title as her presentation, called White Christian Privilege: The Illusion of Religious Equality in America. The professor of education also said she consults regularly with employers and schools on these topics. Her presentation discussed how whiteness and Christianity are responsible for genocide, slavery, and colonialism. She wants people to understand that the role Christianity has had in the construction of whiteness. Don't you just love all these new concepts that pop up? Asserting that concepts like manifest destiny, the idea that colonizers were led by God to take over the land, prove her points about white supremacy and Christianity being responsible for genocide, slavery, and colonialism. She says she wants people to understand that the role that Christianity has had in the construction of this whiteness. So what'd she do? Well, she pointed out how the Bible was used to justify slavery. I'm not sure how she did that, except that slavery existed in the days of the Bible. But slavery existed in the world because of sin. You remember Adam and Eve? Well, it got worse from there. She said Christian privilege is built into the edifice of American jurisprudence. Why? Because our founding documents are based on biblical warrant. And just what is Christian privilege? She also talked about how even non-white Christians enjoy some privileges, how Protestant Christian privilege is opposed to Catholicism. Well, the reality is that Catholicism is opposed to biblical Christianity. Biblical Christianity was here first. She talked about Christian hegemony, the dominance of one state or group over another, that this is a product of systemic religious oppression over the history of this country. One group over others? Our founding documents shout individualism and responsibility, just not individualism which is destructive to the whole. She cited 3 cases to prove her point, including Goldman versus Weinberger, a 1986 ruling where the Supreme Court allowed the military to prevent an Orthodox Jewish military officer from wearing a yarmulke while serving. Now keep in mind, this is the military. The military have uniforms. The military has a uniform code of ethic. The yarmulke is not part of the uniform. So it wonders me how all that is religious bigotry. Nobody's allowed to wear a turban or a cowboy hat either. Now there were 2 other cases brought, neither of which is included in the article. We're left to conclude the one cited was the strongest case, and clearly it wasn't strong. Under a different heading, Christian privilege, the fact that Christians do not regularly fight for their religious freedom, she discussed a case, Employment Division versus Smith, where the Supreme Court ruled in 1989 against 2 drug counselors who the state of Oregon fired after they tested positive for drugs. They had ingested peyote. She cited a 1988 Supreme Court case, Ling versus Northwest Indian Cemetery, where the court ruled that Native Americans did not have a religious right to prevent the harvesting of timber on lands they considered sacred. She maintained that this form of privilege is made up of Christian hegemony, normativity, and privilege. Now, it could be the ancient truism, to the victor belong the spoils, which, it is certain, the Native Americans practiced, but now are upset that we practice it. Christian privilege, according to Josie, is a product of systemic religious oppression over the history of the country. Claiming that Christians do not regularly have to fight for their religious freedom and is indicative of Christian privilege. Why do we not have to fight for our religious freedom? Well, because it's built into our founding documents. Professor Joshi is of Indian heritage, the country of India, and has studied religions, apparently for most of her academic career. She said people need to understand that the, quote, overarching theme is always white Christian privilege or white Christian supremacy, end of quote. On the topic of non-white Christians, Josie said Christian communities of color also have Christian privilege. But when we take into account intersectionality, I had to go look it up too. Intersectionality is a theoretical framework for understanding how a person's social and political identities combine to create unique modes of discrimination and privilege. When we take into account intersectionality, she said, the race element is always there. But didn't a presidential hopeful do the same thing? Not about white privilege, but in the same realm. Her name? Elizabeth Warren. She capitalized on her Native American heritage to secure college grants and even jobs. Didn't her supporters tell us what she did didn't matter? She had relied on family folklore, not scientific evidence. And she profited handsomely from that information. But in the end, Warren possesses anywhere from 1/64th to 1,024th percentage national or Native American heritage. And none of her ancestors were male, which really matters in genealogies. And then there's Kamala Harris. Her father was a black man from Jamaica. Her mother, a Jamaican Indian. Her ancestry, Jamaican. She exalts her father's heritage for votes, not her mother's. So what is the racial makeup of Jamaicans? He's a black man from Jamaica. He probably was not, his ancestors were not born there. Well, in Jamaica, the Tainos from South America are part of that makeup. They migrated over there in 600 AD. Then there's the Spanish from Columbus's discoveries in 1494 and onward. British when they gained control in the mid-17th century. African Spanish settlers bringing their slaves with them. British, 1655, Jamaica became a British protectorate. More Africans as the British needed workers for the sugarcane fields. 1845, Indians, and I'm assuming Native Americans, were brought in to work the plantations. Other Indians came as merchants later in the 20th century. The Chinese in 1854 brought indentured workers. And then there were folks from the Middle East, Lebanese, Syrians in the late 19th century. Jamaicans are a grand mixture of a number of different groups, much like every other Western Hemisphere country. We are now exalting our minority heritage for favor, for prestige, for money. Because if it didn't bring one or the other of these, we wouldn't be talking about it.